What's going on, guys? It's Fantasy Stock Exchange here, and today we'll be bringing forth our, second part of our dynasty buys and sells, which you guys would have already seen our dynasty buys yesterday. We're going to be taking forth our biggest dynasty sells, the guys that are on the market right now, going for more than we would personally want to pay for them. And if we were able to, hold those type of assets that we'd want to be able to unload, really what the market's dictating they would go for at this current price.
Yeah, this doesn't necessarily mean we don't like these players or we think they're complete bums or whatever, but like you said, it's all about market value. We're going to be using keep trade cut as we did for the buys video. And if these players are going ahead of market value for whatever reason, maybe it's how they close the season, maybe it's, priors that people had about these guys as prospects or how good of real life players, but not necessarily fantasy players they are. We're going to be kind of diving into all that stuff and talking about what you can potentially get for these players if you do have them on your roster. One of these guys, in fact, the first guy that we're going to talk about is actually somebody that I unloaded during the season because I thought his value was a little bit too high. So I could actually, I'll throw the trade on the screen that I made for him, and I'll send that to you so we can go over that as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, the thing I want to preface and the thing that you mentioned that is very, very critical here. Us listing players on this list does not necessarily mean that we dislike these players. Does not necessarily mean that we dislike these assets. It just means that we know that we could get more market value for them than we would personally value them. So you're going to see names on this list that might have led you to championships in the past, might have been, big valued assets in the past or relatively moving forward, but for what they're going for currently on the market, we're willing to offload. But before we do that, as always, before we get into the quarterback position, we're going to hit that damn intro. All right, so we're going to start off with the quarterback position. And each of the guys we picked are actually oncoming sophomores, so rookies this year. And the first guy I kind of want to mention is Mac Jones, quarterback from the New England Patriots. And again, is he a good real-life quarterback? Yes. Was he the highest PFF grade quarterback in this rookie class? Yes. But the problem that I have with Mac Jones is that what he does, apart from maybe a 6-point passing touchdown league, doesn't exactly equate to fantasy points. And some of the deals that you can currently offload Mac Jones for will net you more fantasy points in the long run. Because I do think that the inherent bias with people rostering Mac Jones right now is because they view that safe quarterback 2 for the long term as being more valuable than an upside shot at the quarterback 1, which myself and you personally don't believe to be the case. And a couple of these deals that you guys can see on the screen right now, but Mac Jones in a 2023 second for Dak Prescott. Like, what am I missing here? Again, Dak Prescott is not the threat of a rusher that he once was, but this is still a constant 35 to 40 touchdown threat, at least for the next 5 years. And Mac Jones simply doesn't have that ceiling despite being younger. So being able to upgrade from Mac Jones with a second round pick to Dak Prescott is a move that myself and you would make 10 times out of 10.
Right. I think the key with Mac Jones is because I do think his role and his fantasy output can grow from where I don't think he's going to put up 22 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, not even 4,000 passing yards every single year. He was a rookie quarterback this year. So I do expect them to, potentially add some receivers around him, his role to grow a little bit, but he still plays in a Josh McDaniels offense that we saw limit what Tom Brady's scoring potential was for a number of years. We're seeing what Tom Brady's scoring potential truly was now that he's in an offense that allows him to throw the ball at a high rate. And I think with Mac Jones, you're going to get a guy that in his ceiling seasons is going to be like what Matt Ryan was in 2017 or, what Kirk Cousins has been in years past. Like, that's the ceiling projection that you're getting when you can take Mac Jones and you can go after a Konami code quarterback. Like, again, I will talk about the trade that I made in our listener dynasty league. I traded away Mac Jones and Jerry Jeudy, who obviously has, some fans and some people that think he's a little overrated. I traded those guys in exchange for Justin Fields and a 3rd round pick. And the reason I went after Justin Fields is because this was around the time that Fields was injured and he wasn't playing quarterback at the time. So he was kind of out of sight, out of mind. And also Justin Fields at his ceiling can provide you the Cam Newton seasons. He can provide you the seasons that, show why he's a dual threat quarterback. And we saw that even in his rookie year to the extent that I think he has that kind of ceiling. And I know Mac Jones probably from a real life NFL perspective had a better rookie season than Justin Fields, but I trust Justin Fields' fantasy output more, even if he isn't as good of a quarterback from a real life perspective as Mac Jones the rest of his career.
Yeah, no, and I fully agree with you there because the biggest disconnect that people have here is valuing good real life NFL quarterbacks as opposed to how many fantasy points they can get you. And you guys can see again a couple of the deals: Justin Fields and Michael Thomas for Mac Jones in a 2024 first. I genuinely feel like the owner that offloaded Justin Fields for Mac Jones isn't necessarily looking at the overall fantasy football ceiling that Justin Fields has. Because again, as you mentioned, he could be a Kyler Murray, Cam Newton-esque player with his rushing output. So I fully agree with you there. A couple more deals mixed in there, and then we can move on to your player. Mac Jones and Terry McLaurin from Lamar Jackson, pretty much. Like, I would do that deal in a heartbeat. Like, Terry McLaurin's a good wide receiver too, but upgrading from Mac Jones to Lamar Jackson, taking only Terry McLaurin, is a deal I will, again, also make 10 times out of 10, 100 times out of 100, because we have seen when Lamar Jackson is at his ceiling, he's a legit 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 yard type of rusher, quarterback one overall in fantasy type of ceiling. And then finally, the last deal of this section is Mac Jones in a first for Saquon in a first. I'm assuming this would be, upgrading that first round pick. It doesn't necessarily say what the pick is, but to move up from Mac Jones to Saquon Barkley and just downgrade a first round pick is a move I would do. Again, 10 times out of 10. Common theme in this video, 10 times out of 10 is going to make its way a lot into a lot of these trades because some of these deals are just simply pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, for sure. And even with Mac Jones's success this year, the best rookie season of the 5 rookie quarterbacks that went in the first round, he still averaged less than 2 fantasy points per game more than Zach Wilson, than Trevor Lawrence. And then obviously with Trey Lance's limited output, he was producing at a high level. Justin Fields had a stretch of games where he was a QB1 in fantasy. So again, we see what Mac Jones can produce, and I think he's going to grow upon that. If you have Mac Jones in Dynasty, it was definitely a good, late first round pick, early second round pick that you probably spent on him. But see what you can get. See if you can upgrade to some of these other rookie quarterbacks. Maybe a guy like Dak Prescott, who's coming off of like a down stretch, or Jalen Hurts, who we talked about yesterday, as a Dynasty buy. So speaking of rookie quarterbacks, the other sell candidate that we have is another rookie quarterback. And this is kind of like the polar opposite discussion, because Trevor Lawrence is the guy that I think is a Dynasty sell right now. And it's really due to prior, evaluations of Trevor Lawrence, why he's still standing. Because if this was, a different quarterback prospect, somebody that wasn't the generational prospect that Trevor Lawrence was, I think a lot of people would be very, very concerned with what Trevor Lawrence produced in his rookie season. Now, I know he had Urban Meyer as his coach. I know, the weapons around him weren't very good. DJ Chark got injured early in the season. Laviska Shenault didn't take a step forward. Marvin Jones was really his only decent weapon outside of like Dan Arnold for most of the season. But Trevor Lawrence played objectively terrible this year. Like, he wasn't a good quarterback. He was one of the worst quarterbacks in the league by every metric: quarterback rating, PFF passing grade, whatever you want to use. He was terrible this year. And what I think needs to be learned from Trevor Lawrence going forward and into the future is that, yes, this Urban Meyer situation is done, but let's not forget the ownership in the front office that hired Urban Meyer is still in place, right? They're still in charge of determining who's the right guy for the job, who's the next coach, who's going to be the picks in the draft to help Trevor Lawrence succeed, who they're going to sign in free agency to help Trevor Lawrence succeed. I just frankly don't trust this organization to help Trevor Lawrence reach his full potential. So if you can offload Trevor Lawrence while he still has that shine of being a generational quarterback prospect, I'm willing to do it. And the one trade here is a perfect example of something I'm willing to do. Someone traded Trevor Lawrence away for Zach Wilson and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think that is the perfect deal. And I'm not even a huge Clyde guy. The fact that you can get Zach Wilson plus for Trevor Lawrence, and maybe even some of these other quarterbacks, maybe you can offload Trevor Lawrence still for Justin Fields plus, or for Trey Lance plus, or for, Mac Jones plus. I would rather have Mac Jones going forward than Trevor Lawrence at this current point, just because I don't trust Trevor Lawrence's ability to hold on to a starting quarterback job through the length of his rookie contract. If this is what's going to be in place and he's going to play the way he's played, again, if you can get 2 first-round picks and a second rounder like this first deal, if you can get Trevor Lawrence plus Alex Collins in a second to upgrade to Justin Herbert. Like, I don't know what the hell that guy's doing. If you can take Trevor Lawrence and DJ Moore away from Matthew Stafford and Alvin Kamara to a contending team, I think that's a good move. And like I said, if you can get Trey Lance, I think Trey Lance is a perfect trade target. Easily. Using Trevor Lawrence to go get. You take Hunter Renfrow and Trevor Lawrence. Hunter Renfrow obviously had a good season this year, but you get a second round pick in exchange for a big-time quarterback upgrade, because in my opinion, the limited action that we saw from Trey Lance was miles more impressive than what we saw from Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad you mentioned that, because the current range in terms of his valuation, in terms of quarterbacks he's around, just doesn't really make sense from the on-field product we saw in his rookie year. Now, am I willing to say that from a potential talent standpoint, could he end up reaching there? Sure, but I mean, his current valuation doesn't really make sense. He's right around the range of Dak Prescott, Trey Lance, ahead of Justin Fields, ahead of Deshaun Watson. Like, I just don't really see what we're doing here apart from saying he's 22 years old and he's got all the potential in the world. Because realistically, from a situational standpoint, from a talent around him standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, everything's kind of misaligned for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I like buying into systems. I like buying into situations. And for Trevor Lawrence, I just don't see the situation really being able to unlock his potential. Again, I mentioned the perfect candidate here. If there's someone still in your league who values Trevor Lawrence ahead of Trey Lance, do that deal yesterday. Like, do that deal yesterday. They are very, very close to keep trade cut. Even if you have to throw in like a second round pick to make that move, we have seen in spurts when Trey Lance has been on the field, him have legitimate elite quarterback potential. And for Trevor Lawrence, we saw him play throughout the whole season and hasn't even sniffed quarterback 2 in terms of his output on the field. So it's a dark situation. Again, people are going to hold their pre-draft biases for Trevor Lawrence, so you can take advantage of that on the market. So off of the rookie quarterbacks, guys kind of on different spectrums, if you will. Trevor Lawrence being the upside potential guy, Mac Jones being that, steady quarterback 2 for the next decade. Let's move on to running backs. And no, let's be honest, no real running backs are going to last the decade. So let's start off with the guy that has kind of gotten this, win now label, a guy who's been a league winner in the past, a guy who has quite frankly been an awesome contributor in fantasy football in the past. And that's going to be Dalvin Cook, running back from the Minnesota Vikings. And it's not that I don't like Dalvin Cook. Again, if you're a contender, maybe you don't want to offload him because when he's on the field, is one of the 5 to 8 best running backs in quite frankly, in fantasy football, but he's just such a risky asset to hold right now. Cause again, we kind of see him deteriorate in terms of an efficiency standpoint. And this reminds me of what we were looking at with Ezekiel Elliott going into 2020. I'll be completely honest. The situation around him, we don't know what's going to happen with Kirk Cousins. The on-field product, last year wasn't necessarily what we're used to seeing with Dalvin Cook. And yet his market value is still extremely high, still as a top 9 overall running back on Keep Trade Cut. And some of the deals you can currently offload him for, I'll do in a heartbeat again. Cam Akers in a first-round pick for Dalvin Cook in a second. I would prefer Cam Akers straight up to Dalvin Cook. Maybe that's a spicy take to you, but I genuinely think with what we saw in that first playoff game that indeed the old Cam Akers we were expecting is back. Next deal, Dalvin Cook a second and third for Gibson and McLaurin. Again, I would personally rather Gibson long-term than Dalvin Cook, and you're basically getting McLaurin for a second and a third there to offset that, equal value of Gibson and Cook. So again, I'll do that. Cook and Madison for Barkley and Gallup. What are we doing here? Like, that's ridiculous. McCaffrey and Lance for Stafford and Cook. That makes no sense whatsoever. And then you see the last couple deals, particularly Swift in a first for Dalvin Cook. Now, if you're in a casual league and somehow that an owner offers you that, thinking that they're getting the win now back with Cook, do that yesterday again. But yeah, and again, finally, the last deal there would be DeAndre Swift for Cook and Madison. So you guys can kind of see that the recency bias, the production bias that people have are going to hold its way for Dalvin Cook. And again, I do see this being, as much as we don't want to admit it, a very, very similar situation to what we saw from Zeke going into 2020.
Right. And you got a guy that hasn't played 16 games his entire career. He played 14, 14, 13 the last 3 years. And he has a big workload under his belt. He has, over 1,000 career carries, almost 200 career receptions. This is a guy that's getting into that danger zone of when we see running backs start to tail off their production, their fantasy points, their yards per game, and also how many games that they're capable of playing in a season. Like you said, for Ezekiel Elliott, I just think Dalvin Cook is a guy that you need to sell right now. Now, it's going to depend on your league. A lot of leagues probably know this about Dalvin Cook. If they're in like a sharper league, they're not going to sell you, Cam Akers straight up or Gibson straight up. Like anybody that's worth a damn long-term, you're probably only going to get offers like Travis Etienne or someone like that. That's a little bit more unproven. In those kind of leagues, again, it's best to just gauge the value, see if it's worth moving off of a guy like Dalvin Cook, or if you're in a contending window, like for example, in our Bitcoin league, I have Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara. The rest of my roster is kind of aligned with a contending window. I'm kind of just intending to continue contending until my window closes, basically. So that's probably what I'm going to do, because I know my league is sharp. I know nobody's going to give me Gibson for Dalvin Cook. I'll try and maybe float some of those offers out there, but I doubt they're actually going to get done. So that's kind of where I'm at with with Dalvin Cook as a Dalvin Cook dynasty owner. So it all depends on your league, but I think Dalvin Cook, a guy you need to be shopping at the very least.
Yeah, no, I fully agree there. And I kind of mentioned the touch apex for running backs in our lessons learned video. And he indeed almost hits that 1250 to 1500 threshold, is just below that 1250. I don't want to have to sell running backs once they hit the threshold. I want to be able to sell them when they still have value right before they hit the threshold. And Dalvin Cook is right on that list, right near the Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry level in terms of overall touch workload. But as I mentioned in that video, obviously receiving output, I'm less wary of. It's more so, again, the Dalvin Cook 300 carry type of seasons where he's getting wear and tear in his body. We've already talked with Dr. Edwin Porras in terms of a degenerative shoulder issue. Like, he's just not an asset that you really want to hold unless, again, you're a fully contending team, as you mentioned in that Bitcoin league. But anyways, we can get into your player. Kind of had a long-winded discussion on Cook. Who's your first running back we want to discuss here?
Right. And a guy that's really in the same mold as Dalvin Cook, a guy that has been a high-end fantasy producer for a while, a guy that gets his primary value from carries. Nick Chubb, running back from the Cleveland Browns, a guy that at this first deal is just the perfect example of how you can flip Nick Chubb for somebody that's going to give you more longevity, more flexibility. And honestly, again, the floor and ceiling of these assets is what we need to be concerned with, because similar to Dalvin Cook, a guy like Nick Chubb has one down season where maybe he's not averaging 5.5 yards per carry like he's been doing most of his career. Maybe he does get injured for 6 or 7 games or something like that. This guy's value tanks, right? Whereas the guy that in this trade that you can see, J.K. Dobbins tore his ACL before the start of the season. He's still going in the top 3 rounds of startups. He's not losing a whole lot of value despite suffering a major injury. If Nick Chubb tore his ACL, he would skyrocket down Dynasty draft board. So if you can flip Nick Chubb straight up for J.K. Dobbins, let alone get, add a second round pick or a third round pick just to get it done, I'm definitely willing to do something like that. If you're able to flip Nick Chubb for, a future first, whether it's in this year's class, next year's class, again, it's going to depend where the first is. I'm not, going to say flip Nick Chubb for the 112. I think that's probably not a good, strategy to do. But if you can get a top 8 overall first round pick in this year's draft or a 2023 first that's projected mid to late or maybe even early, then I'm definitely willing to do something like that. If a contender is like, hey, I'm going to sell my 2023 first, make a push for this season to try and win the championship. Again, any of these sophomore running backs, Cam Akers, Antonio Gibson, J.K. Dobbins, any of these guys that you can sell Nick Chubb for right now, I think you should be doing that because, again, this is another like ticking time bomb type of dynasty asset. Yes, he's going to be, give you back end RB1 value for the next year or two, maybe. But again, all it takes is one injury for his value to tank. And I don't think we've seen enough out of Nick Chubb to know that he doesn't have top 5 potential just based on his usage, how Cleveland wants to use him. Kareem Hunt got extended before this season. He's not going anywhere. We don't have the, upside of like a Joe Mixon situation where Gio Bernard left. We still have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt in this backfield next year.
Yeah, no, again, I fully agree with you. And it kind of is the parallel, as I mentioned, with, valuing like good NFL starting quarterbacks. Well, Nick Chubb is undoubtedly one of the top 5 talents at the running back position in the NFL. But the problem is because of that production bias or production bias from a real life standpoint, people think that holds weight in fantasy when it simply doesn't. Because at the end of the day here, when he's returning 25 targets and relying upon all of his value happening on the ground game, as soon as he has, as you mentioned, an inefficient season on the ground, like say he drops from, 5.5, 5.6 yards per carry, which he's kind of been doing these last couple of years. Say he has a 4.4 yard per carry season and rushes for 1,000 yards. His value is going to be closer to RB20 than it is going to be his current RB10. Like, it's just going to happen. And again, it sucks because we really want to enjoy these guys in fantasy because they are, again, very good real life NFL players. But there's so much risk in holding an asset like Nick Chubb.
Right, exactly. It's all about the usage. If he was on a different team, maybe they use him like Derrick Henry. Maybe they use him like, what we saw from Josh Jacobs the second half of the year where he's getting, a 70, 80 target pace on the season. But the reality of the situation is that just is not how Nick Chubb is used for whatever reason. Maybe, Cleveland doesn't believe in his ability to catch the ball. Maybe they just like Kareem Hunt. We don't really know, but there's nothing really changing about this situation. I think you need to accept Nick Chubb for what he is, a high-end RB2, low-end RB1. That's probably not going to win you any fantasy leagues unless he's like your RB3 on your roster. So if you can sell him for somebody like J.K. Dobbins, somebody like Cam Akers, somebody like DeAndre Swift, which you probably can't do, somebody like, Antonio Gibson, who have higher ceilings and are younger, it's definitely a good idea to be doing something like that.
Yep, for sure. So off of these, grinder type of backs that we've seen really dominate the fantasy landscape, let's talk about a newcomer that, although, again, we really liked his, pre-draft potential, had a high grade on him. Ultimately, he did fall to the 4th round. And although he did get a pretty significant workload in his rookie season. There's still a lot of red flags here with the Michael Carter situation. Again, I don't want to specifically say, oh, he's a 4th-round pick, we have to fade him, because at the end of the day here, we're looking at market value. And some of the trades that you've been able to flip Michael Carter for, I would personally rather the assets getting flipped in return for Michael Carter. So you guys can see some of the deals. Chase Claypool for Michael Carter trade up. I get it. You don't want to support this, TikTok fad with Claypool. He's a diva. Like, I get it. Like, there's a lot of inherent bias going around with Chase Claypool. But at the end of the day here, I'm trying to win in fantasy football, and Claypool offers me a way bigger opportunity to do so, in my opinion. A couple other deals. McCaffrey for Carter, a 1st and a 2nd. Like, if you're contending, this is a no-brainer type of move. Carter has shown at most fringe RB2 level upside, whereas McCaffrey has shown legitimate generational upside. Again, a couple of these other deals. Upgrading from Carter Gesicki in a 1st to Kyle Pitts. Another move I would love. Undisputed number 1 tight end in the fantasy football landscape. And then finally, getting Higgins plus for Carter. Now, I know this move is old, so you probably can't do this type of move now. But even if you sub out Higgins and sub in, Michael Carter's teammate Elijah Moore, in a more casual league, you could probably be able to get that deal done given their rookie seasons.
Yeah. Michael Carter's a guy that I'm a little closer to aligned with market value for him, because I have him at RB25 in my dynasty rankings. He's RB22 right now. So he's pretty close for me. I was a guy that I really liked Michael Carter coming out of school. He was clearly my RB4 in the class behind, the big 3, Najee, Etienne, and Javonte Williams. So I do really like Michael Carter going forward. But again, it's all about market value. If you can use Michael Carter in a package deal, I think he's the perfect package deal type of trade to make, because if you have, let's say, Chase Claypool, who we already talked about, and you package him with Michael Carter, if you have both of those guys on your team, you could probably get up to a far better receiver. Maybe you can buy low on a guy like CeeDee Lamb or something like that. Those are the type of trades that I'm looking to make using Michael Carter, because, straight up value for value, maybe he doesn't have a whole lot of, standalone. You can trade him for an elite player type of value. But if you want to upgrade to a Gibson or to a Dobbins or something, you could probably use Carter and some draft capital to get there.
Yeah, no, again, I fully agree. Again, this is not hating on the player itself, but more so this landscape at the running back position is a lot of optimism, I find. And people want to be optimistic about what exactly Michael Carter can be in the future, but there's just so much that can happen in the NFL draft and free agency. What if they brought in like a James Conner type of player that ultimately ended up killing Chase Edmonds? Like, there are just so many things, so many variables that are at play here with Michael Carter. And again, is he a talented player? Absolutely. But if any one of those things were to happen, his value would skyrocket down. And typically speaking, those are not the type of liquid assets I want to hold in fantasy football and dynasty.
Right. And we got to remember, too, that this coaching staff that came in is from San Francisco. They know how to run a multi-back system, and they used a multi-back system. They used Tevin Coleman, who stinks. They used Ty Johnson, who isn't that good. If they, can sign a Ronald Jones for a 2 years, $8 million contract, or they draft, Isaiah Spiller in the 2nd round because he fell to them or something like that, they're going to probably do something like that. I don't think that they're going to go into this season with Michael Carter and nobody else. I think there's going to be much better competition in the backfield, because I just think that's how this coaching staff operates, and that's how they learned from Kyle Shanahan. So moving on to the final running back of this video, a guy that, again, you've heard us talk about him before. You know that we're not the highest on Joe Mixon, but Joe Mixon right now, his value is just too high. That's really all it comes down to. He's currently the RB7 in keep trade cut. And I would, again, straight up prefer Joe Mixon to Dalvin Cook and Nick Chubb. So the guys that we already talked about, I would rather have Joe Mixon going forward because he's younger. He has, a better offensive situation. But Joe Mixon being a top 10 running back, a top 8 running back in Dynasty right now is complete recency bias, because this is still a guy with a good amount of touches under his belt, nearly, 1,300 touches on his career. And you can get very, very high value assets in exchange for Joe Mixon right now. So it all depends on your league. Again, if people understand Joe Mixon's shelf life, then, that's fine. But I've seen rankings out there where people have Joe Mixon their top 5 running backs in Dynasty. And that to me is just outrageous, given the fact that he has a lot of tread on his tires. And again, it's Joe Mixon. He's still not efficient. He still hasn't averaged, more than 4.3 yards per carry and over 5 yards per attempt in any season in his NFL career. So if you can trade him, like you guys can see on the screen, for Stephon Diggs, or, in a package deal for Cam Akers, or you use him and Tom Brady, who are both win now assets, and you can rebuild and get 2 big first round picks in exchange for Joe Mixon. If you can, pair him with something and go upgrade to Christian McCaffrey, who's just a far better win now type of running back, like we talked about yesterday, that makes a whole lot of sense to me. And again, those second year or those third year running backs make a lot of sense too. If you can downgrade or, quote unquote downgrade early production to a J.K. Dobbins, to a Antonio Gibson, again, there's an argument that you can make next year that those guys are going to outproduce Joe Mixon next year. And those guys are 3-4 years younger than what Joe Mixon is, have, 700 career touches less than Joe Mixon. And Joe Mixon isn't some dinosaur. He's only 25 and a half years old, but it's about the touch volume that he has. That's the concerning part.
Yeah, and again, I fully agree with you with the aspect of holding, a maxed out asset like Joe Mixon, because realistically, like what he's got one at most top 5 season left in the tank for him. And I kind of mentioned the touch apex when I was talking about Dalvin Cook, but the prime example of who could end up being the next Ezekiel Elliott is Joe Mixon. Like, genuinely speaking, from an efficiency standpoint, from a situational standpoint, all signs point to Joe Mixon being in that Ezekiel Elliott frame of strain of risky asset to hold. And again, like, there's just so many things. Like, find the Kyle Yates in your league and trade him the next Ezekiel Elliott, because at the end of the day here, again, all those assets straight up. You mentioned getting 2-1s and Michael Carter for Mixon and Brady is another dude. Again, I mentioned Carter as being a sell. Maybe you take Carter, flip him for another first and a second. You end up getting 3-1s and a 2 for Mixon and Brady. There's so much potential you can do with offloading a guy that realistically is maxed out from a value standpoint that Joe Mixon is. We saw the ceiling. We saw what exactly he is realistically in a down year for the running backs landscape in terms of injuries, in terms of performance. I don't even think he can repeat as a top 5 running back. Can he? Sure. I don't think he will, though.
Yeah, again, it's going to be on the back of touchdowns. If that Bengals
Yeah.
offense is the best in the league next year, he could definitely do it on that kind of front. But again, this is still not a guy that is going to be very efficient. This is still not a guy that's going to contribute a huge amount in the receiving game. Even in a career high season across the board, he still only had 48 targets. Like, this isn't a guy that's going to contribute big time, even without Gio Bernard there. So let's move on to wide receivers. We have a couple guys, again, not that we hate these players. We still like them, long term. If you guys have them on your roster, they're still fine, but gauge the value. See what people are viewing these players as, and see if you can capitalize on maybe them overinflating what their production is. And we can start with a guy like Darnell Mooney, because Darnell Mooney is a guy that had a very high peak this season where he was having 100-yard games like every other week, getting a lot of targets. He had a very, very high target share this year. He had a top 12 target share in the NFL, which is nothing to sneeze at, right? But we're still talking about a 5th round wide receiver. We're still talking about a guy that is sub 180 pounds at the wide receiver position. And you can probably flip him for far safer assets, guys that are on big contracts or guys that are, still on the rookie contracts, but are going to get big contracts. As you guys can see on the screen, someone was able to flip Darnell Mooney and a 3rd round pick in exchange for Michael Thomas. I like Darnell Mooney. I think he's a good, top 36 type of wide receiver. I currently have him. Darnell Mooney is currently, let me just look up where I have him right now. Yep. I have Darnell Mooney as my wide receiver 35 in Dynasty right now. So he's a guy that I think is a good asset long-term, wide receiver 3 type for your roster. But if you're trading him for top 20 wide receivers, like, give me the top 20 wide receivers. If you can flip Darnell Mooney for Brandon Ayuk straight up, like, give me Brandon Ayuk all day. If you can flip Darnell Mooney in a 3rd for Hunter Renfrow, I would prefer Hunter Renfrow slightly there. If you can flip Darnell Mooney for a guy like Leonard Fournette, if you're a win now team and you want a running back that can help you, right away, I'm okay doing something like that. Again, it's really all about market value. If people in your league value Darnell Mooney as a wide receiver 3, then, don't trade him, hold on to him and reap the benefits. But if you can get wide receiver 2 types, like if you can trade up for a guy like Marquise Brown or a guy like, Michael Pittman or Terry McLaurin or Calvin Ridley or Michael Thomas, anybody in that kind of realm of the rankings, I'm Chris Godwin coming off of an ACL tear. Like, those are the type of trades I'm looking to make.
Yeah, and again, I fully agree. And it's funny because I don't think many people realize, like, Darnell Mooney is not a young asset really anymore. Like, is he young? Yeah, sure, he's youngish, but this is still a guy that is going to be 25 years old in the middle of the season, despite realistically only being in his 3rd year. He came into the league at 23 for the record. So keep that in mind. Again, like, is it a big deal? No, but talking about a 5th round pick, talk about a guy that we view as young and ascending when realistically he's about to be hitting his prime within the next couple of years. Again, just some of the deals that you mentioned were pretty freaking ridiculous. Michael Thomas, a proven top 5 to 8 level scorer at minimum when he's on the field any day of the week. Hunter Renfrow for Mooney plus, like, or Mooney plus a 3rd. Like, what are we doing here? Like, give me Renfrow. Renfrow at least showed a top 15 ceiling this year, and realistically, nothing about his standing should really change. Kamara and Mooney for Henry and Ridley. Like, give me Henry and Ridley all day there, exchanging win now type of running back assets and getting a significant upgrade at wide receiver. And again, you mentioned some of those other deals, Fournette for Mooney straight up. If you need a running back and you're a contender and you could flip Mooney for Fournette, who should be back in Tampa Bay, like, it's a no-brainer to me. So overall, again, like, Mooney's just, although he's a young, tantalizing, he hit 1,000 yards receiving this year. What's he going to build off of? Yeah, sure. But at the end of the day here, if his market value is this high already, anticipating that next step, you go capitalize on it. So fully agree with you on Mooney. The next wide receiver we could talk about is going to be Michael Pittman Jr., wide receiver from the Indianapolis Colts. And again, like, I really liked Michael Pittman coming into the draft. He was a top 8 wide receiver for me. Got drafted with that top 35 draft capital. We love to see it, but I feel like as low as people were on him after his rookie season, we're kind of seeing the market over adjust itself following his, breakout second year. And some of the deals that you could flip this for, again, Tannehill and Pittman basically for Cousins and Thomas. Like, I view Cousins and Tannehill as pretty similar. So you're basically flipping Pittman for Thomas. Like, I get it. Michael Thomas is a diva and he's missed these last couple years, but let's not forget the elite ceiling that he's shown when he's been on the field. Couple of those deals, Metcalf and Gronk for basically Ayuk, Pittman, and Gallup, getting that elite wide receiver with Metcalf. I get it. He had a bad year this year, but you're getting an elite wide receiver and a top 5-6 tight end for the next couple of years with Gronk. Absolutely. Pittman and Higbee for Godwin. What? AJ Brown for Pittman, I'm not going to really take at face value because I doubt that was made by a level-headed person. And a couple of the other deals there. And again, the thing with Michael Pittman, do I think he's a bad player? No, I do not think he's a bad player. However, could they add target competition? Absolutely. T.Y. Hilton's not what he once was. Talking about Zach Pascal, Ashton Dulin. Like, I'd be shocked if the Colts either exited this offseason or the draft without adding at least a wide receiver 2-level player to take targets away from Pittman. Again, see a fine wide receiver 2-3 type for the next 10 years? Sure, but I'm not betting on that type of player, long-term safety, as opposed to, going after a guy with a real ceiling. Again, if someone were to offer me a mid to late first-round pick this year for Michael Pittman straight up, I would rather just re-roll the dice and try to take, a Garrett Wilson, a Jameson Williams, a guy that has a legitimate wide receiver 1 upside case.
Yeah, and some of the existing wide receivers, I think you should be able to use Pittman in a deal. Maybe you have to add a little like draft capital or something, but if you can go after, DJ Moore with Michael Pittman, if you can, trade Michael Pittman a third and a, fourth or something like that for DJ Moore, go out and do that. If you can trade Michael Pittman for Chris Godwin, if you can trade him for Elijah Moore, if you can trade him for, if you're looking to get a little bit more win now, Calvin Ridley, somebody like that. Those guys all have shown way higher ceilings than what Michael Pittman has shown. And it was a nice step in the right direction for Michael Pittman. But again, it's a run-first offense led by Carson Wentz with no target competition on the team. And he was still only really able to finish as a top 30 wide receiver in points per game this year. So this isn't a guy that broke out and had like a top 10 season. This is a guy that had a top 30 season.
Yep. No, again, I fully agree with you here. Pittman's good, but take advantage of that market value. Another guy that you should be taking advantage of market value on, and a guy that we were both high on going into the 2020 draft, but realistically, the value oversees the production that we've seen from Jerry Jeudy. Take it away with Jeudy, the wide receiver from the Broncos.
Yeah, and Jeudy, that one obviously hurts me because behind Henry Ruggs, obviously who crashed and burned literally.
Yeah,
Jerry Jeudy is a guy that I really liked coming into the draft. He was a guy that I had as a first round graded wide receiver, but this is a dude that hasn't exceeded a 20% target share at any point in his career so far, which is very concerning. Now I know, he ranks among the top 80 wide receivers in, catchable target rate because his quarterback play has been terrible, but at the same time, you got to be able to show that you're a better receiver than your quarterback play. And I don't think we've necessarily seen that from Jerry Jeudy. We've seen it from guys like Terry McLaurin and DJ Moore, which is what I expected to see from Jerry Jeudy this season, but we haven't seen it. He had a down rookie season. He had a lot of drops, had 114 targets or whatever in his rookie year, could only produce 600 receiving yards. And this year had, the high ankle sprain. And then when he came back from the high ankle sprain, really didn't show a whole lot after that either. So this is a receiver going into his third season that really hasn't proven anything yet, but is still being valued highly because of priors, because of where people had him coming into this season, maybe, or even just as a prospect in general. This is a guy that I think I am willing to flip for better assets, guys that have produced at higher levels, like Brandon Ayuk's, like even Michael Pittman. I would prefer Michael Pittman over a guy like Jerry Jeudy. I just think this is a guy that is being overvalued relative to what he's actually shown in the NFL and the career trajectory that he's currently on.
Yeah, I mean, he's currently valued as the wide receiver 24 on Keep Trade Cut, which for reference has Michael Thomas as the wide receiver 32 right now. And again, people are valuing the age there. I get it. But at the end of the day here, if you can flip Jerry Jeudy for Michael Thomas plus right now, like you should have done that move yesterday. I don't care if you're a contender. I don't care if you're a middling team. That deal is sure to accrue you value, at least during the season. Once Michael Thomas is the player that everybody realizes that, oh, that guy never left. He's still that elite top 5 level wide receiver in the NFL. Wish we could have oversaw that. Well, if you're a fan of FSC, if you're a subscriber to FSC, you know from yesterday's video that you should be buying Michael Thomas, and this is a perfect candidate to be able to flip. Like, you could realistically get Michael Thomas in a second for Jerry Jeudy right now, and if you're not smashing your phone accepting that deal, you're doing fantasy wrong.
Yep, exactly. Again, it's all about market value. Do I think Jerry Judy's a fine, top 40 wide receiver in Dynasty right now? Sure. But would I prefer, Amon-Ra St. Brown? Would I prefer Michael Pittman Jr.? Would I prefer, Hunter Renfrow, who's shown a lot more to this point in his career? Yeah, I would.
Yeah, no, again, I fully agree with you there. And speaking of Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's actually going to be my next on my sell list. And again, this has nothing to do with the fact that I think, Amon-Ra's a bad player. I don't want him on my teams. Now, that has nothing to do with the case. There's just so much more risk in holding this type of asset as opposed to offloading him in a potential deal to upgrade. Again, you mentioned a guy like Elijah Moore would be the perfect candidate. And in some circles that are more focused on recency bias, you could probably flip Amon-Ra for a guy like Elijah Moore straight up. Other moves I'd be looking, again, like a Brandon Ayuk plus, Terry McLaurin plus, Mike Evans plus, Ridley plus. Like there's just so many more pivots you can make for a guy that is valued as the wide receiver 18 right now. And the reason why I'm lower on Amon-Ra St. Brown, again, has nothing to do with the fact that he was able to command targets this year and he was able to produce. It's more so from the fact that what are we realistically projecting his ceiling as? Because the main comp I really have for him is, could he be a Robert Woods player in the next level? Sure. Is he ever going to be a true wide receiver one, true target hog in an offense? I don't necessarily see that being the case, whether it's them adding competition in the draft. They have a ton of top 100 picks this year. The Detroit Lions do. Would I be shocked if they added, a David Bell, a Treylon Burks, a Drake London to this wide receiver core? No, I would not. And if we're projecting a player based off, this vacated volume that they could siphon into, he's the wide receiver one for what should be a pass heavy team. Those are ultimately the cases I would like to sell rather than the cases that you can make for talent. And some of the deals you see here, again, Amon-Ra in a first for Diggs in a second. Give me Diggs side any day of the week. He is an elite level wide receiver talent and fantasy football producer. Amon-Ra in 2-1s for CeeDee Lamb and Kirk Cousins. Like, you equate Kirk Cousins to one of those ones, hypothetically. It's basically Amon-Ra on a 1 for CeeDee Lamb. Again, the type of pivot I would be willing to do to upgrade to a set in stone talented player like CeeDee Lamb. And again, some of these other moves, Ayuk straight up, give me Ayuk. Amon-Ra for DJ Moore, give me DJ Moore. Like, there's just so many more pivots that I would prefer to Amon-Ra St. Brown, thus making him a sell at market value. Again, doesn't have to do with me hating the player, more so has to do with me hating the appropriated value on the market right now.
I loved Amon-Ra St. Brown coming into the draft. He was my wide receiver 6 or 7. Like, I had him right behind the Elijah Moore, Jalen Waddle, Rashad Bateman tier of wide receiver. It's just that Amon-Ra doesn't have, a super, super high ceiling. It's because he did most of his damage without Hawkinson and Swift in the lineup. And even when Swift came back, he was still doing damage. But this is a team that's going to add to their wide receiver core. This is a team that doesn't have a quarterback set in stone right now. And even though Amon-Ra is a guy that I think that belongs in the top 30 wide receiver rankings, probably top 25, for the most part, depending on, what you value, age or, youth. If you can get a target hog wide receiver one, somebody that has that potential like DJ Moore, like Chris Godwin, like, Calvin Ridley, then I'm absolutely looking to sell on a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, because as much as I do believe in the talent, he probably is capped at like a top 15 ceiling, whereas DJ Moore, Chris Godwin, and Calvin Ridley have all finished highly in the past, and Calvin Ridley and Godwin have finished as top 5 wide receivers already.
And again, I fully agree with you. We mentioned that on the show yesterday. But either way, let's pivot off of Amon-Ra St. Brown and let's wrap up this video, because at the end of the day here, we talked about 4 wide receivers, we talked about 4 running backs, and we talked about 2 quarterbacks. There's not really many tight ends that we noticed that were overvalued on the market, more so than just if you're a contender, you pivot to an older, higher upside option, a la Rob Gronkowski. Whereas if you're younger, again, like maybe a Cole Kmet would interest you more. So overall, again, tight ends are pretty bog standard, which for the record, they are pretty predictable this year anyways. But any other closing thoughts you have before we wrap this up?
Kelsey's really the only one that stands out to me as like a dynasty sell at the tight end position, just due to the age. It's just, he's always going to be risky from the fact that one injury and he's, down the rankings and there's no coming back from that. So he's the guy that if you can sell him for, a TJ Hawkinson or something like that, like I think I'd be willing to do something like that. If you can sell him even just for a guy a bit younger, like Kittle or like Waller, I would be willing to do something like that as well. So that's it, guys. If you enjoyed this video, as always, hit the like button. Helps us grow, helps us out tremendously. Comment your biggest dynasty sell candidate down below. You can provide some reasoning as well if you want. And then subscribe to the channel if you are new, if this is the first video you're seeing of ours. We're going to be coming at you with some dynasty stashes at the end of this week, as well as a super flex, or is it going to be a one quarterback or a super flex startup?
Super flex.
Yeah, so a super flex startup mock draft we're going to do with the Discord members. So we're going to gauge some value of some players as well during that. And then next week, we're going to get right into rookie prospects. I'm going to be coming at you on Tuesday with Treylon Burks, who is the first guy that we're going to dig into. And then, Danny's going to be coming at you with Garrett Wilson on Thursday. So we're right into rookie season. We're starting to get into, Senior Bowl and East-West Shrine game time. And pretty, before we know it, it's going to be the combine in a couple weeks.
Yep. No, absolutely. And again, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like. And as always, help us on our road to 10,000 subscribers. I think I've mentioned this these past couple of weeks, but we are currently just under 9,000. If you guys could help us get to 10,000, it'd be definitely appreciated. Either way, peace out. Enjoy your day.